Okay. If our team over at Ziflow can keep an eye on the entry, anyone that comes in a little bit late, if we can just make sure that they get in. But for those that are here, welcome. My name is Will Foreman. I'm with Capability Source, and I'm excited to bring you some thought-provoking content on how you can turn your creative pain into productivity and enjoy the work that you all do every day. At the end of our conversation, we'll hope that you understand several innovative approaches to the creative operations challenges that you all face every day, specifically surrounding the standardization and refinement of processes, improving your project intake and setup through automation, and digitizing your proofing and approvals. Our sponsors here today are Capability Source, Ziflow, and Monday.com. Capability Source is a consultancy and a product company that's dedicated to operational complexities and fostering seamless teamwork. Ziflow helps creative teams handle high workloads, streamline complex workflows, and ensure regulatory brand compliance through digital proofing. And Monday.com is a collaborative work management technology provider helping creative teams manage all of their work in a single place. Today, you'll be hearing from Josiah Coons, a former creative operations transformation leader at Bandai Namco. He'll share this story today, by the way. Current capability source consultant, and most importantly, probably a former wildland firefighter. You'll also hear from dog dad and lacrosse coach Mike Rymack, senior solutions engineer with Ziflow and a leading digital proofing provider. And I, the world-class softball player that I am and grill master, will be your host today. In today's sessions, we'll hear the pains, solutions, and wins that Bandai Namco experienced under Josiah's leadership and explore approaches that you can use to solve similar challenges within your own organization. We encourage you all to ask questions. Please post these questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, as we'll have a Q&A portion towards the end of our call. And with that, let's dive into the Bandai Namco story. Josiah, could you give us some background on Bandai Namco and tell us a little bit about your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Will, and happy to meet all of you. Welcome to this webinar. For those of you that don't know, Bandai Namco is a global entertainment company. I lovingly refer to them as the Disney of the East, right? They have verticals in so many different things, from amusement parks to video games, obviously, collectibles, trading cards. You name it, they pretty much they're into it. And when it comes to entertainment, they even just purchased a basketball team just for fun. So Bandai Namco, when I joined the company, their history, is unique in the standpoint that they were once two different companies. Bandai and Namco, they're based out of Japan, based in Tokyo. They ended up coming together and joining forces to produce this conglomerate, if you will. They're a $2 billion company to date, and just have been growing just really rapidly over the past few years. When I joined the company, their big initiative was to get into the Western market in a greater way. They had a strong foothold in the East, right? In the Eastern market, but how could they expand into the Western market? Was one of their core challenges, right? And one of the core things that they positioned to us as the employees of at the time to expand into the West. And so that really was a chief charge for us. You'll know Bandai Namco now probably from the IP that it holds. Pac-Man, for example, was one of their original IP back in the day. But more recently, right, they've been known for things like Dragon Ball, Naruto, Tekken, Soul Calibur, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, just to name a few. And actually, Elden Ring was the last video game that I actually published when I was with Bandai Namco before I left them back in 2022, and it ended up winning Game of the Year. So really proud of that, and what we accomplished there. And as I mentioned, Bandai Namco was really wanting to get into that top tier of publishers. In order to do that, they had really needed to expand their global presence and really focus on the Western markets. And so, yes, they had a headquarters office in Tokyo, but they also had headquarters for the Americas in California, and they had a headquarters in Lyon, France, for EMEA. And that was one of the chief challenges, was how do we take this amazing content and really drive that home globally in a synchronous fashion, right? Where we're maximizing our opportunity, for the marketing content that we have. Because in the video game industry, assets are our currency we trade in order for attention, right? Marketing. And so in order to run large marketing campaigns for these global products, we need assets, and we need a lot of them, and we need them to be synchronized so that one region isn't going live with an asset ahead of another region, because in that way, the internet knows no bounds, and that region that was launching that asset first would garner a lot of the attention, where the other regions would lag behind. And so really having that synchronous push was really something that was necessary. And I think that if you look at, when I stepped into the company, that was definitely a pain point that they were experiencing, and something that, they wanted to improve. And so, with that, how do you take a traditionally Eastern company, expand it into the West, and really push that, market share in the West? That was one of the core things that the company was facing, and something that I was brought in to help lead the charge on. I joined the company as creative director for the Americas, but with that, there's a lot that goes into that, right? Creative touches so much more than just creating the asset, right? It's the preparation, it's delivery, it's so much more that goes into it, the approvals process. And for me and my team, we were kind of in the middle of it all. We had to take input and source material from these wonderful IP and transform them into marketing content and get it out to market. And one of the things that people thought when I joined the company, that this particular team, the creative team, was the problem child, right? The one that was slowing everything down and not getting those assets out quick enough, fast enough. And so that was one of the core things I had to address when I walked into the company, was peeling back the layers as to why people thought that way. Because in reality, if you actually looked at the amount of time that the projects, right, or the assets were with creative, it was actually very small in comparison to all the other things that we needed to take a look at. And so yeah, those are a few of the pain points, a few of the challenges that we were facing right off the get-go.
Yeah, thanks for providing a little bit of background on Bandai. With the needs that you had just mentioned, could you tell us some of the biggest challenges that your team was experiencing at Bandai?
Yeah, I think, what I stepped into really, I term was kind of the Wild West. There wasn't really any structure. There wasn't any real rigor. I mean, people would be requesting things via email. They'd be, walking by your desk. We had this person. We'll just call him Bob. I called him a drive-by Bob. I mean, Bob would literally come over to your desk, and he'd start, very innocently, a little small chit chat, how's the weather, its favorite sports team, whatnot. And then he'd just kind of slide it in there and be like, hey, so, I've got this thing and I need you to, kind of address it. And can it be done like later today? That'd be great, and then he'd be just ready to roll on out. And, that's really disruptive, for a creative team, right? Because there's a lot that you're having to keep track of. And as people are just kind of walking by and giving you bits of information or asking for more things, it's really hard to actually basically capture all of that information and then prioritize it. And so it was, I think, at the crux of it, it was the process of going through a digital transformation where we needed to have consistency in the way that people communicated. We needed to have consistency in the way that work came in, work came out. And then really, looking at some of the core challenges that the company was facing, such as brand consistency. As I mentioned, we're producing, on average 20 to 30 video game titles a year we were publishing at Bandai Namco. So if you think about that, that's literally almost one every other week, right? Or every 3 weeks. That's a lot of content, right? Just from a product standpoint. But then you layer on all of the assets that need to be generated for those marketing campaigns. We're talking thousands, hundreds of thousands of assets every year that have to be generated, have to be approved, have to be, properly processed, and making sure they're, in a place that's accessible, like a digital asset management system, so that they can be leveraged across the globe. And that was one of our core challenges, was that we didn't have structure to that. Assets were going out that maybe weren't fully approved, or assets that didn't have the proper branding on them. And so there was just a brand consistency across all the regions that we needed to solve for. And I think, if you really break that down, it comes to the standpoint of, the biggest pain point is that everybody wasn't on the same page. You had teams, and you had, people that were just operating in so many different ways across, 300 plus employees in the marketing and creative ops, kind of space. It's a lot of people to get on the same page in 3 different regions, 3 different cultures, 3 different ways of working. So those were some of the core pains or challenges that we were experiencing.
So my takeaway from that is that there were a bunch of little fires everywhere, including different regions. And your firefighter experience probably helped you out there a bit, I guess. How did you use those pains to drive change in the organization?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Will. I think if we take a step back yet again, you'll Bandai Namco is a very large company, right? And so with that, I like to use the analogy of, Bandai Namco is like a lot like a cruise ship, right? You've got this big vehicle, right, that has tons of momentum. It's not easy when something's moving in a certain direction to make fast, quick pivots, right? That's going to disrupt a lot of your organization and probably break a lot of things. And so we couldn't just pivot like a motorboat, right? Or speedboat, where you can just be like, all right, we're going to take a hard left here. It was more something that we had to approach from a standpoint, okay, how do we gently steer this cruise ship to the destination we want to get to? And so in thinking about that, we really needed to solidify a plan that would enable us to get to the destination we wanted to get to without basically breaking everything in the process or throwing people overboard, right? We want to make sure that everyone got to the place together as a team. And so I think for us, we really took a step back and said, okay, I think it comes down to 3 main areas that we can focus on. I think the first one, we talked a little bit about standardization. We have these 3 different regions that are all needing to generate content, all of pretty similar content, because we're supporting the same titles, and it's all coming out roughly at the same time. And so how can we have more rigor in that process? And so really looking at the process side of it. But within that, each region had different ways that the organization was set up, different team members, different skill sets. Not everything was structured the exact same way. So my big takeaway was, okay, let me fly out to these different offices. Let me get in front of people. Let me understand their processes. Let me understand their pain points. Let me understand some of the challenges they're experiencing. And then taking that back and creating a framework which we could provide some structure and rigor, but at the same time, enough flexibility within that framework to allow each of the offices to operate a little bit differently, but still get to the same result or the same outcome in a very similar way, or at a very similar time. And so for us, I think, standardization was really key. That was definitely one of the points we wanted to drive home. I think if you launch off of that, now that you have a framework, then you have the ability to then drive efficiency through what we term as automations, right? Things that used to be mundane, or things that used to take a lot of manual effort. Well, now that we have a framework in place, now we can actually leverage automation to drive a lot of that forward, so that there's more time to actually do things that are not necessarily, the mundane, but more of the value added work, if you will. And so for us, I think that was kind of point 2 that we really wanted to drive home. And then I think finally, if you look at, one of our core challenges was time to market and brand consistency, those really come around, the idea of approvals, right? Approvals at Bandai could take anywhere from a month to 3 months, right? Well, when you think about time to market, that's an eternity, right? And so how can we shorten that process? What was there different ways to do that? When I first got there, there was literally printouts that I was handed that I have to go down and actually sign, right? That was our approval process, and then pass it on to the next person in line, and they would take a review and then sign off on it. And so moving that into more of a digital space, was something that was going to really drive improvement for us.
Well, it sounds like there's some big challenges that you were facing over at Bandai, and they seemingly were taking a lot of time and a lot of money, and weren't really producing that much value for the organization. What you guys do to turn things around?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, you have to look at, how can you get buy-in in order to make these changes, right? These are course corrections that we're wanting to take. And as I mentioned, it's difficult to move an entire organization together. And so, I took the standpoint of okay, well, let's first make sure the plan in place makes sense from, the leadership perspective, right? So, what I did was I put this plan in place around these three major pain points and said, okay, here's what I believe are approaches that we can come around that would actually solve these pain points. And what's that going to do for us as a company and organizations, right? So I flew out to Tokyo. I met with our president, our CEO, I mean, basically the C-suite, and positioned this, plan in front of them, right? And it really resonated with them because of the way that it was positioned, right? I talked about, okay, if we want to improve our brand consistency, here are the things that we need to be able to do. We need to make sure that our licensors, because a bunch of Bandai's products were licensed products, are happy, right? Because at the end of the day, these are relationships that span the course of years, right? Not months, but years. A title like Dragon Ball, Bandai has been publishing games, for 20 plus years. And so, how can we ensure that that relationship stays in the healthy region? Well, in making sure that licensors have proper approvals for all the content that we're actually producing. It's not being missed or skipped. And so I think, that was a major one for them that really resonated. You look at, how can we make sure that we're being quicker into market, right? That's a huge number for them. Because the quicker we're into market, the more eyes that we can get on things more quickly. That's going to improve the overall sales numbers. And so, that was another key metric that I took a look at and say, okay, well, through automation, through standardization, those things will both be improved. And then finally, taking a look at, the idea of, okay, how can we make sure that our assets that we are creating are being leveraged properly, right? That we're not having teams request the same assets over and over and over again, but that we're actually getting those out into market, and having things like a dam, right? That is in place that globally can be pulled on and leveraged so that we can make sure that our assets are being used properly. And so those were a few of the key things, right, that I positioned to the leadership team. When you take it down to sort of the team level, right? How can we make sure that the people actually doing the work, right, are on board, and making sure that they're are satisfied from the standpoint of like, oh, I'm willing to jump on board with this and make these pivots or make these changes. It's really talking about, okay, how's this going to improve your life in the day to day, right? So for project manager, for example, they could be spending, 30 minutes to set up a project, right? They could be spending, maybe 2 hours chasing requirements, because of bad intake, different things like that. Where creative, they could be second guessing, feedback coming on an email based on markup that's needed, or a marked up PDF where they're like, I just don't understand really what this person's saying, or it's not in context. So understanding like some of those core pain points and coming around solutions, right, that are going to minimize that. So it makes their life better day to day. It's easier for them to jump on board and say, okay, I'm willing to go through that change process in order to, get the outcomes that we're all looking for.
It sounds like leadership and team members collectively came to the conclusion that a more unified marketing and creative organization was imperative for their success. Could you quickly provide some insight into the results that you guys realized?
Yeah, you'll see the results over here on the right, but I think the first result that I love to speak to and I'm really proud of is the fact that, every year that I was at Bandai, we had our best year ever, right? And so that just spoke to the fact that these changes, incrementally over time, right? It was over the course of time led to driving our, sales numbers higher and higher and higher every single year. And obviously you have to have great products, right? But you can have a really great product, but if no one knows about it, right, it's not going to do you a lot of good. And so being able to marry up great product, also with outstanding marketing, right, I think that in and of itself is the greatest metric, right, that you can present. And obviously leadership was extremely happy about the fact that, we had our best year ever, every single year that I was there. But to dive into specifically, the results that we saw, right, the 50% increase in asset reuse, um, that was great for us, right? It enabled us to have brand consistency. It enabled us to make sure that the assets we were generating were being leveraged properly. Again, not having this different teams request the same assets to be used in the same way across different regions. It was massive. Another one that I'm extremely proud of is the 63% reduction in cycle time. The time to market was such a huge lift, right? So if you had a project that was supposed to take you a month, for example, getting it out in under 2 weeks, right? That's massive, right? Taking those approvals that were taking, months or weeks at a time and getting them down to weeks or days, right? Those are things that really led to drive that number forward. And then finally, right, the bottom line, decreasing our cost per asset by 10%. And when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of assets per year, that's a big number, right? And that's cost savings to the company that they can put into the P&L, or they can choose to reinvest into more creative endeavors, right? That engage more people that obviously can have a better impact on the marketing side to drive those sales numbers up. So those are a few of the key metrics or results that I'm really happy to say that we achieved and get to share with you all.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Josiah, for sharing the story of how you and Bandai's leadership team tackled this type of transformation. We got a lot of folks that are joining us here today who can relate to your story, maybe not at the same exact scale of what your organization went through, but in the conversations that I've had in my day to day, a lot of creative operations organizations face very similar challenges. I know that we have our sponsors here today, Capability Source, Monday.com, and Ziflow. Um, Josiah and Mike, could you guys walk our audience through Project Essentials for Monday.com and Ziflow as a few available options that will enable them to achieve some similar results in their creative operations process?
Yeah, absolutely, Will. I'll kick us off. Let me start sharing my screen, and we'll go ahead and jump in here to Monday.com. And what you'll see here is the Monday.com and Project Essentials workspace. This is the admin workspace for Project Essentials. And let me just chat a little bit about what Project Essentials is in case you guys don't know. Project Essentials is essentially a framework that we here at Capability Source have created. So as I was speaking to earlier, having a framework is so important, right? To be the baseline, right? The building blocks to have a standardized process. And what we've done is essentially take those best practices, take the key learnings from, Bandai, and essentially put them into this product itself. And so we're going to step through a little bit about the Project Essentials setup to talk to you a little bit more detail about some of the key things. So you'll see over here on the left-hand side, we have task list templates, we have initiative templates. So I'm going to speak about these two in particular. So if I open up the task list here, you'll see that we have a design template. So if I click on this, this is one of the things that we did at Bandai was we provided a framework for our for our teams, right? All the different tasks that need to be accomplished, there needed to be a little bit more rigor and structure to them. And so you'll see here that we actually have within Monday these different groups or milestones, if you will, right? Kickoff, planning, copy, creative, compliance and legal, and finally build and publish. So in this way, right, we essentially create a framework, right, a structure that you kind of progress through in each of the different tasks that need to be done. And the region itself, right, at Bandai, going back to the Bandai story, each region would have the exact same milestones. It would have the exact same, way to process through, right, a particular task that was given. Now, what was maybe a little bit different was maybe the steps within that, right? So that's the flexibility I was speaking to. Maybe the steps might be a little bit different in some cases, and you could have a task template for particular regions, right? But at the end of the day, it's still going through that same sort of process, right? And so you'll notice here in this particular design template, we have things like kickoff meeting, right? We have things like gathering assets, developing base copy, etc. We're able to, have durations for each of these different tasks. We're able to, if I scroll over here to the right, we're able to actually set roles or even users, right, for those particular roles. We're able to set up, expected planned hours, right, and dependencies, right? This is really key and critical, that there's certain things that need to happen in sequential order. And so that needs to be denoted, right, in the structure of your, task plan. And another thing I'll just highlight really quickly here is, because we have the dependencies, because we have the durations and the planned hours, we actually have this timeline that's extremely helpful, because now whenever this template is going to be leveraged, from the point its initiation or initialization to the end is going to be X amount of days, right? As long as everything goes to plan. So this can create some expected outcomes, right? We can actually have some expected dates and timelines now versus just sort of guessing, right? It's like, I think it's going to take this long, but I'm not really sure. We gotta get into it. But this at least gives you a baseline, right, that you can start with. Now, not everything is going to happen exactly perfectly, as we know in the creative world, exactly to plan, but this gives you a great jumping off point versus starting from scratch every single time. So this was sort of the base building block, if you will. We would leverage these task templates to actually build what I'm going to show you right now, which is a campaign, right? Or an initiative, program, however you want to call it in your particular industry. For us, we called it a campaign or a program. And so what we've done here is essentially create a project mix, if you will. So these are essentially the different projects that need to necessitate a certain outcome. So in this case, right, going back to the Bandai example, we're going to do a product launch, right? This could be for, let's call it the new Pac-Man game. So Pac-Man's launching a new game. We need to have packaging for that product so they can be on store shelves, right, around the world. In order to do that, we define that, okay, there needs to be a base project, right? A base beat is what we called it at Bandai. And what that is creating all of the content that's going to be necessary for that packaging to get into market at a base level. So all of the graphics, the copy, all of that information essentially that we looked at in that design template is going to take place right here. The great thing about this framework is that we can actually set the type of project that each one of these is going to be. So for example, all of these are going to be design projects, but if you wanted a project mix, say of like a website as one of these project types, you could do that. If you wanted to launch a new website as part of your rollout for your particular product, you could update this to be a web development project, right? So these are the flexibility is again coming into play here while still having the structure. We have dependencies on these, so it's saying basically that this base packaging beat needs to be completed before these other regional ones, right, for the US, EMEA, and APAC actually kick off. You can have things like duration of days. You can set roles again and planned hours for each of these. You can also even give different task templates for these different projects. So you notice that the initial task template for the base beat is the design one. But the ones following that, they're more localization efforts. They don't actually need to create everything from scratch. They actually now have things that they can work with, and all they need to do is localize it for their region, for their market. And that's going to pull the localization task that I did not show you, but I'll show you now. It's essentially a slimmed down or streamlined version of the design task template. So now we can actually get through this a lot quicker because, again, all of those base things are already created. So this is just a few things within the Project Essentials framework that enabled us to create that standardization, but also flexibility within that.
Thanks, Josiah. I think, is there a proofing component? Now we had that in our takeaways today. Is there a proofing component here that fits in this space?
Yeah, I can, let me jump over into the actual production environment. So if we're looking at the, how does this come to play in sort of a live environment, right? That was more of the back end sort of admin workspace. So now if we jump over into the actual production environment where we actually see, this at play, like say if Bandai was actually instituting this, we've got different personas here and dashboards we can take a look at, right? So obviously you've got a requester, right? Persona, someone, in this case, it's Ashley, who is putting in a request, that request for the new product launch, for example. And so she's gonna come in and go ahead and enter that request into the flow. Brittany, who's our traffic manager, is gonna pick that up, right? And she's gonna triage that and say, okay, essentially, yes, we need to get this in play. Let's scope it. Let's make sure everything's in line. And then we're going to pass it over to Jake, who's the actual job owner. So I'll click on Jake's dashboard here and pull this up. And you can see that in Jake's dashboard, we've got this program, right? This initiative here that we kicked off, right? So in this case, it's the Bandai Namco demo is what we've named it. And it's been generated. You can see that it's pulled that initiative template. The automation has run, right? All of that's taken place. Brittany's taken care of that. And it's actually kind of moved us into this now where we see the packaging projects here that are in the job board for Jake that he owns, right? So these are all the ones, the localization pieces, the APAC, the EMEA, the US, the China. These haven't been started yet. You can see August 6th is the start date. But if I scroll down here, we actually see that we've got Jake here has got an active one for the base packaging beat, right? And this is where, we can see all the different things like, okay, it was kicked off yesterday, right? That's great. June 17th, we can see an actual due date of August 6th and how that ties back into the start dates of these ones before, right? So we're talking about the dependencies. We've got things like a task list, right? So if I want to go look at, a particular item, I can just click on this and it's going to launch me directly into that basically project plan for that particular item. You can see, oh, great, we've got X things done, right? These conditions have been set. They're at 100% complete. The conditions are updated, right? The timeline's progressing. So if we jump back here, we can actually see that, okay, we've got 41% complete. That's amazing. That's great. That's awesome. So now we have the ability to give insights, right, into these different projects to our marketing teams, to the other stakeholders. We can actually understand, okay, this is what's going to be transpiring and at what point. So for us, this was, a really key and pivotal thing to actually be able to have that structure, that standardization that would lead us through the automation portion, right? Where Brittany, as a traffic manager, it could take her 4 hours to set up all these different projects, make sure all the information was copied over properly. Well, guess what? Now that's all automated with the click of a button, right? And so her job that took her 4 hours now takes her 5 minutes just to basically review information and then click a button, right? So it really drove efficiency in that regard. So let's say, okay, for all you creative folks out there, right? Projects have been kicked off. We've got, things that need to now be worked on, right? Well, they're going to be assigned in this case, right? It's a packaging project, something that's going to be on store shelves. We need to look at the designer, right? So Mark is our designer. So we're going to jump down to Mark's dashboard here. And you can see here that Mark is assigned to, if I scroll over to the right, he's assigned to these projects, right? So we've got him in at certain planned hours. We can see the timelines. We're just going to pick up the USA one because that's the one that will be relevant to this particular region, this particular audience. You can see start date, due date, etc. But the really exciting part, right? The exciting piece of this is, again, for Mark, how can he get feedback on the things that he's created in real time and in context? And that's a key pivotal piece to the creative process. And so for him, right, he's working on this project. He can come in here and say, okay, I have a design ready. I'm going to upload something from my computer, right? So I'm just going to pick an asset image, and I'm going to load this essentially into Project Essentials and Monday.com. Monday.com then looks at that and says, oh, you know what? We actually have automations in place that are going to kick this over into Ziflow, right, for proofing and approvals. And so I'm actually going to kick it over to Mike from Ziflow to talk a little bit more about Ziflow and the proofing capabilities there.
Absolutely. And we'll see some things happen here in a second. It's interesting. It's been listening to Josiah the past 30 minutes, but also over the past couple of weeks, we've been working on this webinar. A lot of the pain points he had at Bandai Namco, I hear a lot from our clients every single day. There's a need for a large volume of assets, and a lot of them on pretty short timelines. Most enterprise organizations and even small mom and pop marketing shops have a higher demand for content, which drives a need for speed. But they also need to control the approval process. Brands understand that, their reputations can be tarnished by poor quality content or, potentially even cultural missteps if we're putting out an advertisement in different local markets across the globe. So they need strong control over the approval process, but they need it done fast. And then speed and control, as we all kind of know, pull in opposite directions. Can lead to maybe an internal tug of war with conflicting goals over who needs to accomplish what. And when we think about turning pain into productivity, it's a huge pain, this need for speed and control. How can we make it more productive? And that's where a company like Ziflow, working with Monday and Capability Source, kind of comes into play. We try to solve this speed and control problem by providing, a platform that helps collect fast and accurate feedback in one collaborative discussion space. A platform that supports complex review workflows. And then, of course, most importantly, easily connects into all the other applications like we see on Monday. If you were paying attention to the screen, you may have seen that after Josiah dropped that file into the creative files column, two things happened. One, it updated the status automatically on the Monday board for us. Additionally, there's a link there where it says proof link that would take us directly into the proof to review. Now, if we switch over to the Monday dashboard, we'll actually see, or the Ziflow dashboard, we'll see here in a second, if Josiah refreshes his screen, that there's a new proof that's been created called tekken8.jpg. So we took the file name in there, and it's now in the review process. I want to point out there's a workflow that's been applied automatically. This is a pretty standard workflow. Starts off with the design team. So right now we're looking for feedback from Glenn and myself and Josiah. A couple decision makers on there. We even had a deadline, which is nice because that's going to do some of the automated reminders. We can then route that automatically to a stakeholder review or a legal and compliance review or all these other teams that need to provide feedback. We can build them into that workflow so they're invited in at the right time with the right people in mind, and then a regulated workflow process can be implemented from there. Now, if we click into that proof, we'll see a couple things as well. One, I think Glenn's probably already added a couple bits of feedback in there. So we can already see some change requests from different people that are coming in real time. As Josiah clicks in, we can see we have a variety of markup options at our disposal, whether it's a circle, a square, an arrow to point something out, text selection on a PDF. We can tag a specific frame in a video. We've got a variety of options right at our fingertips to mark this up properly. And even then, as that feedback does come in, that ultimately leads to a decision of approved, changes required, whatever that may be. And as we do make these decisions, we have these different events inside of Ziflow where decision makers provide feedback, submit that decision, and so on. That translates right back into Monday. So if we go click over back into there, we'll see the status on this change here in a second based on that decision making coming in from our team. There we go. That little update can happen automatically just by kind of pairing these two tools together. And that project manager, that traffic manager doesn't have to wait for that email to come through of someone saying changes required and then go to Monday and change it manually. All those little micro waste steps could be handled by us, which allows you to maybe cut down on the review cycle, have that 63% review cycle reduction that Josiah talked about. All these other little benefits that can happen just to, help maintain the speed of the approval process, but control it and mitigate the potential risk of a proof getting out there that maybe has a couple issues with it. Josiah, I know this is something that Bandai spent a lot of time on. I'm just curious, maybe a little bit more about the benefits of what a proofing tool brought to your team beyond all the structure that comes with the project management tool, but now the actual feedback process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I was at Bandai initially, approvals were taking weeks and months, right, for certain assets. And so, we were able to cut that time down significantly, right, to days and weeks, right? Because for two reasons. One, we get contextual information on the asset itself, whether it's, asset or static or video asset. But beyond that, being able to route that globally and not have to do sign-offs, and take it to different offices, like it dramatically made a huge difference for us at Bandai.
Yeah.
And so it was one of the key things that helped drive that efficiency forward for us, for sure.
Yeah. One other question. I think, a lot of people look at proofing and we think about the efficiencies and speed and the efficiencies and even the potential monetary benefits that can come with cutting down on that proofing and approval cycle. What about some of like the personal benefits? Did it reduce the headaches in the office? Did it make people's jobs a little easier knowing that I don't have to send that reminder email anymore? Ziflow or other proofing tool will do it for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the reality is, as I said, the anxiety that can come from trying to decipher feedback and making the right changes, so you don't have to do another revision cycle, right? That's very high for the creative. And so being able to just clarify all of that is really, a benefit that digital proofing can bring that traditional like markup PDF or email, right? It just doesn't have that same opportunity. So yeah. Well, awesome. I go ahead.
I was going to say thank you, Mike and Josiah, for providing our audience here with a few options on how they can address some of their pains and technologies. We had only scheduled this until 1:45, but I do want to kind of do a quick wrap up. And then there's a couple of questions in the chat. Those that are with us, if you need to, kind of scoot, this is being recorded. We will distribute the recording after if there are any questions that may be relevant to you all. At the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned that my goal for you all was to walk away with a few tips on how to standardize and refine your processes, how to improve your project intake and setup through automation, and a few additional tips on digitizing your proofing and approvals process. Based on Josiah's story today, we saw how Bandai was able to enhance communication and collaboration within the organization while receiving a 50% efficiency gain, primarily through reduction in campaign setup effort. How they were able to streamline their workflow with automation and significantly decrease their cycle time by 63%. And additionally, how they were able to simplify their approvals and requirements management process, resulting in a 10% decrease in cost per asset, primarily through what Mike kind of walked us through, their digital proofing and approvals process. You also saw between Josiah and Mike how our sponsors, Monday.com, Ziflow, and Capability Source are able to assist you in turning your pain into productivity with some of the innovative solutions that they have come up with throughout the tenure of their organizations. With that, we're going to conclude our presentation today and open things up for questions for anyone that has any of those. And if you haven't already, feel free to pop a question within the Q&A chat button, and we'll be happy to address them. Me as our host, I'm going to go ahead and check the Q&A button real quick. And we do have a couple. Josiah, I think this is probably for you. Tools are helpful in transformation, but if people do not adopt changes, results are difficult. How did you tackle the people in the culture side of that transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's all too real, right? You can have the best tools, the best technology in the world, same thing like products, right? But if no one knows about it, no one uses them, they don't do you any good. I think, change is hard for anyone, right? So first off, I think it's understanding what you're asking people to do and how that's going to impact them. And then, for, I say, a big majority of folks, right? So let's just say, 60 to 70% of folks, if you can show them real life outcomes that it's going to make their life better, most often they're going to jump on board, right? I would say that's the majority of folks. You're going to have, I'd say 20% that are probably, more resistant. And so you may have to go a little bit deeper. You may have to talk about, okay, how is this going to impact the company? How is this going to transform, their opportunities to, make what they're doing better. And then the last 10%, they're going to complain no matter what, right? They're the complaining crowd. You're going to have those, right? And it's really about, if you can take those people that are complaining and turn them around into your champions, then you've won, absolutely won. And so spending the time, right, with them one-on-one, spending the time to walk them through things, spending the time to help improve their lives in particular, I think that's, a great starting point. And there's all kinds of tips and tricks, beyond that. But driving change throughout the organization is not easy. You can't just go to leadership and have them produce an edict that's going to, essentially make everyone jump on board. It's a good start. You definitely need the air support, but it's working with people. It's understanding their challenges and getting them into, the mindset of like, okay, this is better for everyone. So let me jump on board and let's do this thing together.
So, Josiah, we do have a question from the audience that is primarily around this fewer revision cycle statistic here. Question reads, how are you able to determine that 10% cost savings per asset?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of things that went into it. I'm not going to dive into all of them, but I think the biggest one that I can speak to, right, is the fact that we started measuring how many revisions were necessary, right, for each types of assets, right? And we started seeing, okay, what is our baseline based on where we started? And as we implemented these changes, right, in particular digital proofing and other things, how is that actually, dropping, right? So if we were at 10 revisions, dropping it down to 3, right? Well, each one of those revisions takes a certain amount of time. That time is essentially money that we're paying to an individual to actually do the work, right? So that's just one of the ways that we took a look at that. There are a few other things that we also evaluated, to come up with that number, but in brief, that's one of the ways.
Yep. Awesome. And then one more question. I think, Mike and Josiah, both of you probably could provide some insight into this. I know we're almost at time, but I know a lot of our creative operations organizations that may have joined us today, they probably have some sort of digital asset management solution in place. Could you guys speak to, what that would look like in terms of potentially either integrating or just working with a digital asset management tool with a tool like a Ziflow or a Monday?
Yeah, I can kind of take a stab at this first. When it comes to a digital asset management tool, it's not where proofing happens. It's a place that you have all the raw files in. It's a place that when you're, we're talking about reusing files for future proofs, great place to go back and look at those as well. When it comes to proofing, though, that's the file that's going to go out and be posted somewhere. That's the one that we need the feedback on, and it's still going to live in the DAM. But with Ziflow, you can use it as a place now where we can collect clear feedback on it. People can't edit the asset. Instead, they're just looking at the actual file we want to share. And we have the potential then for, if that is approved, we can place it somewhere in the DAM. Maybe it's in an approved file location where, we see the status changes to done on Monday, and we know we can now go to that approved file folder and download it and use it. So that's where we see it typically come into play. Also the potential for hot folders, dropping it in somewhere and saying, hey, if I put it in this folder location, create a proof, and the automations that can run off of that. Josiah, I don't know what your experience is there as well, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, for us at Bandai, it was critical in a couple different ways. Obviously having a repository for approved assets is huge, right? To flow out of like a Ziflow into an approved area where people weren't pulling the wrong version of assets, right? So previous, iterations of that asset. But also the automation portion was really pivotal for us, right? To automate the movement of these things from all these different assets, and then applying the metadata that's been accumulated through its life cycle in the project management system, in an approval system like Ziflow, and placing all that metadata on the actual asset as it's transitioning into that final resting place and dam, gives us then power for that asset reuse, because people can actually find what they're looking for versus it just landing in a random folder and then you having to know the actual file name to search up. You actually now can use filter sets, and you can actually have, you know, specific areas that are focused for those particular users, and creating, you know, folders for them. So for us, the dam was instrumental in that process of you know, cutting our cycle time, getting our brand consistency up, even just the asset reuse. So it was absolutely pivotal.
We have one question for those that are sticking with us. We had one question. We're going to take this last question, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. Josiah and or Mike, I'm assuming Josiah, which tool serves as the main repository of the files during the workflow? Monday.com or the DAM, or a combination of both?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on how you want to set it up, right? It can be all of the above, or neither, right? For us at Bandai, our workflow was we used our project management tool to house the inversion process files, right? So source assets would be in DAM, but in any sort of work that was taking place would be within the project management tool, and then be kicked out to Ziflow, right, for proofing and approvals, right? So we really leveraged the proofing and approvals through Ziflow. And then once that information came back to us, we were able to then go through the next revision cycle. And then once it was approved, we actually placed that final asset into our project management system. And then we had that, as I mentioned, that automation set up to essentially cull all of that metadata from our project management system and push it into our DAM, into the final repository, final resting place with all that metadata included, including any sort of approval information. We wrote all that information through automation onto the assets. So again, that saved, I'll just say that anyone that has managed a DAM, automating all of that metadata saves so much time. We're talking hours and hours and hours, you know, for all the different assets. So it was a big piece to our success as well.
Awesome. Well, to Mike and Josiah, thank you both for giving a few tips to our audience here on how to turn their pain into productivity. To our audience, we appreciate you all taking some time out of your afternoon to join us today, especially going over a little bit. Truly are appreciative of the opportunity to connect with you all. As a follow-up, we'll send out the webinar recording, as we mentioned at the top of the call. And we really appreciate you guys joining us today. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.